and welcome back to another in our series of Webequie Supply Road live streaming sessions. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'll be your host for this and other streaming sessions to be done over the next few weeks, running to early December. And they're focusing on preliminary observations from the baseline studies, then moving on to other topics that will be of interest to our viewers and listeners. The intent of these shows, of course, is to keep community members and the general public up to date with the environmental assessment as it progresses. We hope that these sessions encourage open, thoughtful, and informed discussion that will help make the environmental assessment as comprehensive as possible. And with me today is a special guest who's never been on before, Jeff Sherman. Jeff's a wildlife
Hi, Don.
biologist with. Hi, Jeff. How are you today?
I'm doing well.
That's good. And Jeff's a wildlife biologist with S&C Lavalin, and he's been pretty deeply involved in many of the studies that we'll be talking about over the next few weeks. And today's topic is Wolverines, and during this session, we'll be talking about the Wolverine work that's been undertaken as part and some of the preliminary observations from these studies. So let's get started, Jeff. First of all, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here. Don't be a stranger. Join us again, hopefully in the future. We'll rope
Okay.
you in to co-host some other shows. So maybe Jeff, you can give us a bit of a background on Wolverines. Maybe tell us a bit about them generally and what they eat, their range, and their typical habitats.
Yeah, they're pretty much, I would say, close to being a top predator in the boreal forest. Wolves are probably at the top, but not much takes on at least one by one at one wolverine. They have huge ranges across the boreal forest, hundreds of kilometers. Males have extremely large ranges. You're at least most of the time years, and I've only seen them twice. I just happen to see two of them at the same day. But they are spread around the entire forest. They take on just about anything. They will eat carrion. It's whatever they encounter, they'll try to take down. Outside of wolves, there are very few things that will take on a wolverine.
So they're what you'd call opportunists, I guess, aren't they?
They are very much an opportunist. If they find something injured, if they find something dead, they will look. They will eat it. And that's actually in terms of what we're doing for some of our studies, we're taking advantage. We'll talk about that later, but yeah, they'll take any bait, whatever, and any
Yeah.
scent will bring them in. So yeah, so they're very much an
Uh,
opportunist.
it's interesting, Jeff. I've talked to Webequie community members about Wolverine before, and they have a bit of a reputation in the community, and one of the things that a lot of people remember them or know of them for is because is stealing beavers from traps.
Yes, yeah, and there's really nothing that can keep them out. If you look at some of the researchers, they'll build these huge, traps for them, and they won't be checked for months. And if you ask them, well, what about if one gets trapped in there? Will they starve or whatever? And they're like, anything, nothing can. They'll just like claw their way out. It's basically anything they want to get into, they can get into, and anything they want to get out of, they can get out of. So yeah,
Yeah,
they're
that's
really much,
it's.
yeah,
I was just going to say, Jeff,
very much.
that's an interesting way to describe it. I saw, and you probably have seen the same program. There was a on the nature of things with David Suzuki. They were reporting on, I think, some work they were doing in Alberta, some research on
Yeah,
wolverines, where they
yeah,
built
up in
those
the
small.
Rockies. Yeah.
That's right, where they built those small cabins, and they were talking about them, you know, getting, chewing their way through these logs.
Yes.
I think it was. It was just unbelievable.
Yeah,
Like
it's like
these.
they're like 10, 15 centimeters in dBH, the logs, and that doesn't, it slows them down, let's say, but it, it doesn't stop them.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I understand there have been the two types of surveys that have been sort of conducted with regard to wolverines as part of the baseline studies. There's the aerial surveys, and then there were the occupancy surveys. And can you maybe talk a bit about the aerial surveys first?
Sure. The aerial surveys, they were recommended by the MNRF, and primarily they were done. The first focus was for caribou because that's one of the major animals we're looking for in terms of species at risk. But there was also we were going to inventory anything else we could encounter. That includes things such as wolf or lynx and wolverine. So this consisted of basically 3 years, thousands of kilometers of transects flying north to south and across the entire whole regional study area. Um, and basically, they look for anything in that any tracks you would encounter. Um, any tracks you can encounter and identify from a helicopter. So Wolverine are definitely one of those things. They have a very distinctive track. I think you had a slide of them earlier showing the tracks of them. And yeah, though that is one of the major things you can encounter. They have a very kind of, you could see it in the left picture, kind of a very distinctive track. They're low to the ground. They don't have a huge stride, and they create a track that you can identify pretty well from the air.
And Jeff, they have huge paws, don't they? Like a lynx
Yes.
would, right? With a yes.
They're not quite the same as how lynx are often say they float on the snow.
Hmm.
They're a little heavier, they're a little lower to the ground, but they definitely nothing slows them down when they're walking through the snow. So you can definitely see them, yeah, and nothing slows them down when they want something, such as this
Yeah,
picture of one hanging from the air. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah.
Some rather impressive claws
Yes,
on those
rather
paws, aren't there?
impressive claws and rather impressive jaws. Those are two things
Yes,
that the
yes.
Wolverine are known for. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. So,
Okay.
tell me a bit about the results of these
Sure.
aerial surveys, if you can.
Yeah. So the 3 years were actually they kind of show that it's interesting from at least from a scientist perspective how the 3 years show different results. In 2018, we had tracks at about 20 locations, but we didn't see any animals. They were observed kind of to the southwest, the south, and the southeast of Webequie. And they were mainly associated with, and this is one thing we took advantage in the next study we're going to talk about the occupancy. They often were situated along lakes and rivers. In 2019, we saw a lot of tracks, and we saw a lot of them predominantly to the east of Webequie, right at the eastern section of the study area. And this was the year we saw the most tracks and the most signs of Wolverine, and including we saw a Wolverine during one of these surveys, and it was about 17% of the transects had signs of Wolverines. Uh, and then in 2021, they did kind of mostly disappeared from the area. We only saw 3 track observations in 2021 of Wolverine during the winter aerial survey, and this was only about on 2%, and we didn't see any individuals that year.
Yeah.
And some of this is like, why is this a big population change, or is this just a why were we seeing all these results? But if you think of each individual is moving hundreds of kilometers, they could be, and you're out there flying for a relatively short period of time, a few days in the entire winter.
Yeah.
They may be at the totally other end of their range during that period, and then the next year they're totally at the other side of their range when that. So like when you're dealing with hundreds of square kilometers for an animal that searches this entire spot, if you can get these wide varieties in terms of what you think the population is, which is why we end up doing it multiple years.
Yes, yeah, makes total sense.
Yeah.
And really,
Yeah.
I mean, they're driven by availability of food, aren't they? Right? Where they go,
Yes.
it's
Yeah. The
survival.
one it's survival. They're looking for any. They're looking for food. They're looking for something. Can they chase this down? Can they, or they just randomly come across something that something else has killed? So they're looking for food. They're always on the hunt for food, and except when they're breeding, then they're on the hunt for something else.
Yes, that's right. Now they're are they mainly active at night, Jeff?
No, they're active all through the day. They're mainly they. Some people may consider they're more crepuscular, which basically means in the
Yeah.
evening and the day. But I've seen them at all times of day. If you look, we have thousands of pictures, and we'll talk about it in the next section, of
Yeah.
them active during the day. And the times I've seen them from the helicopter, they were out running from us during the day. So they're very active during the day, moving around.
And
So yeah,
again, it's probably just driven by, need to survive, right? It's driven by the chase for food, isn't it, really?
it's driven by the
Not by
chase for
time of
food.
day necessarily.
Nope. But yeah, if you want to say when are they more active, they're probably more active. Like a lot of animals, they're more active
Yeah.
during every t- at the evenings and in the mornings. But yeah, they'll be out looking for food whenever they feel like it. So yeah, they're not really. Yeah, I wouldn't say they're not really something you're worried about encountering during the night. They're more definitely in the daytime period. Nope.
Oh, Don might have frozen up. We'll just wait till he comes back.
Okay.
And so you said that they're not nighttime animals, but daytime animals.
They're active very much during the day. Yeah.
And I noticed that you had a den here on this photo, this den location. Maybe you could talk to us about that.
Yeah, I can talk a bit about this while Don's away. This is just, we got lucky basically for this. One of our crews was out looking to do some bird ARU work, and happened to come across what we determined was a Wolverine den. So, and there were lots of signs of activity around the den. So what we did was basically we set up a couple of cameras around this area, trying to see if what kind of activity we would get. And we ended up getting pretty lucky. This was in 2021, and we managed to get a number of 5 movements of the Wolverine between the two cameras. And only one pass actually we could identify the individual as was a female.
He had said that the kit. Oh, Don's back. Oh, well, his audio's off. While we're working on the audio problems, Don had said that the kit population was actually below one per Wolverine. How often they're born, like they're 0.89. He was saying during the radio show.
Yeah, they have a pretty low fertility rate. They do not produce every year a kit, and they don't produce very many. I would say one is the usual. If they're going to have a kit, it's going to be one. I've heard of occasionally they will produce 2, but mostly it's going to be one. And yeah, they don't reproduce every year. Uh, Often the problem is they exist at such low density upon the landscape that really encounters during the breeding season at the right time. You may be a male searching for a female, and you're searching over the entire hundreds of kilometers, and you just don't encounter females, and so you miss out on that breeding opportunity for that year.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sorry, Jeff, I things just
Yep,
froze up there. I don't know what happened there, but anyway, we're back, or I'm back at least. Let's now move to the occupancy surveys. Maybe you
sure.
can give us a bit of a background, Jeff, on the purpose of the surveys in general, and how these sort of fit into that, sort of painting that baseline picture for Wolverines within the project study area.
Yeah, so as I said in the previous study, they move a lot around the landscape. So it's really hard sometimes to get a picture of how many Wolverines you have in a particular area. So occupancy is basically a way of trying to see, well, it's pretty explant. You can understand the word occupancy. Are Wolverines there? So basically it tries to look at um, it's called a capture recapture uh, study, and basically tries to see at all these stations, we have 25 across the landscape, whether Wolverines are revisiting. And is it just, and once they revisit, you can kind of get a sense of how they are distributed upon the landscape. Are they moving between stations? Is it just like a random one? And the more visits, the more recurring visits, the more visits you get to different locations, you can kind of get an idea of how many Wolverines are at the landscape. So The
Okay.
picture we're showing right now is basically what we call the run pole. It's basically a structure, big wooden structure we put out there. We nail it to a tree. It's basically trying to get the Wolverine to climb up this, because in front of this structure, we attach a bait. Basically, it's hanging from a cable. It's a big piece of meat. You showed that picture of the Wolverine hanging from the bait earlier. We also have on the bait, we put this lure, scent lure, which is basically a combination of skunk, beaver, and muskrat. Basically, the smelliest things we can get. And one thing about wolverines, as well as other mustelids, they're really attracted to stinky things. Well, it's like, your dog, for instance. It really likes stinky
Yes.
things. So, a number of predators, a number of things we would say, why would you ever want to come close to this? It really brings them in. So, basically, we were trying to bring them in for two reasons. On this structure, you can see kind of on the picture there, you can see just to the back of the Wolverine, there's a coil of barbed wire. And there's also these clips it has to climb through, and then there's cameras, which where we get these photos of the Wolverine climbing up the run pole and jumping and trying to get to the bait. Um, so yeah, so we have these things for two different reasons. Basically, when they climb through all these barbed wires and clips, there's a chance that we get hair samples. And what we can do with the hair samples is DNA analysis. So we can tell basically if you see the same Wolverine at different stations, you can, okay, if you get the DNA analysis, you can say, okay, this Wolverine was at this station, and this station. You could also tell things like whether they're female or male. So you can say, how
Hmm.
many females do we have on the landscape? How many males do we have on the landscape? Um, we also can do this by cameras, because what we're trying to do when they come up this run pole is, you saw the bait was basically much higher up than where the base of this run pole is. So we get them off the ground so we can take pictures of them. And when they reach up trying to get the bait, it exposes their chest. And what the chest basically allows us to do is, Wolverines have kind of a distinctive pattern of light and dark hair on their chests. So we can tell individuals based on what their pattern is on their chest. We can also tell if if it's female, and if she's lactating, we can see nipples on the bottom of her chest. And then we can tell, okay, A, she's a female, and B, she's probably got a kit. So we can
Hmm.
kind of tell both the sex and identify individuals. And when we look at all the pictures over the 25, we can tell, are individuals coming in once and then leaving, so they may be at the edge of their territory, or we can get like if someone that's moving around through multiple kind of different stations. We can say, okay, so their territory is probably encompassing a lot of these stations. So
Yes. Now, Jeff, just going back a bit, I because we got cut off there earlier,
yep,
the den that was discovered sort of almost by accident, I guess, right?
yes, it was
That
totally by accident by our birders. Yep.
that's amazing. And these things are typically extremely hard to find, and you can tell by looking at the den, can't you? I mean, that was quite a find, wasn't it? And
This was,
because it
yeah,
could be anything, really, right?
this was total serendipity. It's like they often are looking for like uprooted trees, or if they're in a more
Yeah.
like harvested area, like a pile of wood debris that a forest company has left behind. They're looking for something that kind of provides some protection. They can crawl underneath, and it's like, it's got a pile, it's snow on top, so it's nice and warm when they're inside.
Yeah.
Um, but as I said, the range of these animals is, hundreds of kilometers. So randomly finding one is really lucky.
Yeah.
So yeah, so as I said earlier, yeah, we set up some cameras. We tried to find out. The first year we got a bunch of pictures of what we assume is the same animal moving
Yeah.
between the cameras around this area. And then we went back this year, set up more cameras. We set up additional 5 cameras. Unfortunately, we didn't find it. She didn't.
Hmm.
She didn't seem to reuse the same den. Whether they reuse or how often they reuse is still kind of is unknown. Even some of the researchers have been doing this for years. It's one of those really hard things. They're really rare. They really have huge ranges. Um, what they think is they kind of reuse an area year to year, so they may not
Yeah.
use the same den, but they're probably within a few kilometers of that den. So they may kind of like, and other species do this too. They may rotate kind of between every year, because
Okay. Okay.
because one of the things about they're a big tough animal, but they're not the biggest animal on the block. They can be
Yeah.
predated. So yeah, so they're to be as safe as possible. So every year, if we went back a few years, we may get lucky and she may use it again, but you never know.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's really interesting. Yeah, I mean there really hasn't been a ton of research done on these animals, has there? I mean, yes, there have been studies done, but it there's still a lot that's unknown about them, isn't it? Isn't there?
Yeah, there's lots unknown. That's why they're kind of a very mysterious, and there's like, they're seen as a very kind of powerful, you can't predict what they're doing, is because they're really rare. They're really
Yes.
big. They have they're a mustelid, a weasel, so they're really, for their size, they're really aggressive and they're really tough. And so yeah, so and then there's always the comic. uh,
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
everything. So that even just builds, that's they're the comic book characters based on this animal, which already has a pretty big reputation of being a really ferocious character. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So, what have been the results of the occupancy surveys so far, Jeff, would you say?
The occupancy surveys, we had the first year. The second year we just got in. We actually had a delay. As everyone up there would know, there was a lot of flooding. So we were supposed to collect all the run poll data at the end of May, but there were a lot of sites we couldn't get to. But reporting on the first year, we had 7 individuals that we looked at, and they appeared at 13 of the 25 stations. The most we
Okay.
had was one female. She visited 3 stations. So you can kind of say that maybe that was kind of like the center. The center of her kind of location is right in the middle of our kind of study area. And then we had in total 2 that just visited once and a couple that visited 2 or 3 times. There were, of those 7, we had 3 females, 2 males, and 2 we couldn't identify. The 2 we couldn't identify were the 2 that didn't climb the run pole. You would say, why
Okay.
wouldn't you climb the run pole? But you never know with individuals. Some individuals went up and they were just like hanging from the top and hanging from the bait, and others are a little more just like people, a little more wary.
Yeah.
It's a novel thing. You don't know what it is. You may show up and go, okay, I'll just come back at some other time once I've checked it out some more. But yeah, so we had 5. 4 of them were identified by as male or female by the cameras, and an additional one was identified through the DNA.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's
So you can see
incredible.
why having both of those different ways of identifying allows you to kind of like increase your sample size, because we wouldn't have been able to identify one if we didn't have the DNA sample as well.
Yes, yes, yeah. Um, Now, looking at the slide that we're looking at now, Jeff, uh, I understand that we had some other visitors, and that's the beauty of having these cameras set up, isn't it?
Yeah, these cameras, you think, okay, oh, it's a big piece of meat. Why would any non-predator come in? But as I said, lots of animals. We have a lure, so it's really stinky. So, and it's a novel piece of things. Oh, there's Wolverine. Speaking speaking of reputation, yes, you know, we did not
So
have
what?
this one. Is it? Yeah.
So we had caribou, we had moose. What other visitors did we
We had
have to these?
caribou, we had moose. Those, and surprisingly, we had more caribou visit than we had wolverines in terms of numbers of pictures we got. Um, they're all coming. There's lots of caribou, and there's lots of moose, and they come, and you know they're they're just trying to figure out what is this weird thing that's in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, so there's a bunch of ungulates that are coming to inspect what this kind of wooden structure in the forest is that smells a lot. But then there's all the other predators that we brought in as well, with a big piece of hanging meat. We had wolf. They were seen at 7 stations. We had black bear, because we run these from about January to May. So from April onwards, you can kind of get some of the bears are waking up and they're inspecting some of the stations. And then we also had smaller predators like red fox. And there's lots of pictures of things like ravens, things like uh, gray jays or Canada jays or whiskey jacks, whatever you want to call them at this point, visiting as well and taking off bits of meat. But by far the thing we saw the most of was pine marten. They visited basically every station, and we have over 16,000 pictures of them basically coming up and doing this and getting up, because they're a lot more agile than the Wolverine, and then just jumping and hanging on the meat and just swinging away as they chow down. And it's one of the main reasons we have to go back every month and make sure the bait is put new bait if it's required and put new lures, because these guys will basically take down basically every lure by the end of the month.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so they're everywhere.
Chip.
I didn't expect to see as many. I have a lot of work in the boreal forest, but I worked in Alberta for about a decade, and I did hundreds of camera studies, and I almost never saw pine marten. I saw lots of fisher, and it's kind of different. I didn't expect up here to see this many, but nope, they were everywhere. Every station, every time, every month, basically, every time we put up a lure, one of these guys would show up.
Jeff, did we ever see any lynx at the wildlife cameras?
I'm trying to remember. I can't think of any lynx. I may be wrong.
Yeah.
We had lots of smaller. We had lots of different things. I think it was 13 or 14 different species. We had things as small as mice visiting.
Wow.
Mice, squirrels, lots of birds, owls. I'm trying to remember if we had a lynx. I can't remember.
Yeah, because I mean, there's lynx all over the area, aren't there?
There are lynx are all over the area. They tend, and you. I find I've done camera studies with lynx, and they sit there and stare like a cat. So sometimes we don't get them off, and it was hanging up in the air. So you need to be either. Although we did see fox. I'm trying to remember if we saw. I can't remember. Nope.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just curious because I know, I mean, I know there's a lot in the area, and I would have thought, being curious animals, I thought they would have
Yes, they are very attracted to
visited.
cameras. You'd think they would
Yes.
come in to visit, but I'm trying to remember if we saw any lynx. I would assume so, yes. I'm
Okay.
gonna say yes. Based
Yeah,
on,
yeah.
oh,
Oh, there's that
yeah,
Wolverine again. I just can't shake it.
yeah,
Well, Jeff,
yes,
this has been great. This has been a really good session. Sorry to everyone for the technical problems. I don't know what's happening here, but this is really good. This is really helpful, and we're going to be back again in a couple of weeks. And we're going to talk about fish and fish habitat in a couple of weeks, and we're going to continue these discussions on the preliminary observations from the baseline studies. And the idea is, again, just to keep people aware of what's going on with the environmental assessment. So thanks again, Jeff, for joining us. It was great.
okay, it
And
was fun.
just a reminder to Indigenous communities and the general public that they can engage with the project team in lots of different ways. We have a menu of options, including focus groups and community sessions and drop-in sessions and virtual focus groups and virtual community presentations, teleconferences, and we can visit your community and do a local radio call-in show as well. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we will see you again in 2 weeks. Miigwech.